Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you, and thank you for your family for a lifetime of public service and also for being willing to step up at this point in your career for this huge responsibility. Sir, it seems to me that the world's never been more dangerous any time in my lifetime than it is right now. 5 threats across 5 domains. You've talked about space and cyber as the 2 added domains today. I want to talk about the rise of China and the relationship that our allies play in that. But I want to clear up one thing today. There are a lot of people who say, well, we spend $730, $750 billion on our military. I would remind everybody we have now for the first time, thanks to you and others and the President, that we have our first audit of DOD, November of last year. We're gaining great insight how to save money. In fact, if we were to go to a 1-year CR this year, there's $4 billion already been identified by the Department of Defense they don't want to spend, but they would be obliged to spend if we end up in a 1-year CR. You mentioned that earlier. Today, China spends, if you adjust it for purchasing power parity, almost on parity with the United States. Not that much different. And they're really focused on their naval forces. Their Belt Road Initiative, they've got 36 ports in Africa, 51 ports in South America that they've made these proprietary loans to. My fundamental question, sir, in a strategic relationship with Secretary Pompeo and Secretary of State, how do we deter China in a world that we see what their interests are in the West Pacific, South China Sea, et cetera, as well as Africa and Southern Asia? How do we use our allies and the relationship that we've had since World War II to actually deter not only China but Russia in this environment?
Yes, sir, you took the answer from me. First of all, we have to have a whole-of-government approach. So it's not just DOD, it's Department of State, it's USAID, it is HHS, it's DOJ. It's everybody has to be in on this because that is how the Chinese approach it. And then you're right, we have to really muster our allies and partners to do the same, whether it's in Europe or in Asia. And I will tell you, in Asia, many countries over there are quite concerned about China's influence. It is a hegemon, if you will, and if not that, exercising suzerainty over the region. So it's something we need to really work aggressively on, and if not, we were going to find ourselves. The Chinese are very patient. They are very strategic. If you go back to arguably probably their greatest leader, Deng Xiaoping, who had a famous saying that said something like, bide your time, hide your actions, play the long game. They are playing a long game, and we are playing the short game. I think that's where what's so important about the NDS is it points us to have our own long game so we can be at the right point in time. We don't want to be adversaries with China. We want to be competitors. We want to compete in the economic domain. But we have to make sure we're addressing the security concerns first.
As you consider this role and as the President chose you, it seems to me there are 3 big areas of areas to consider. One is your commitment to the National Defense Strategy. Are you today committed and satisfied that the National Defense Strategy will serve the interests not only of America but of the free world going forward?
Absolutely, Senator. What really impressed me about the defense strategy is that for the first time ever, it recognized China as a strategic competitor that could be an adversary if we're not careful. Look, I was in the Senate here in 2000, 2001, where we debated China's entry into the World Trade Organization, and we granted the authority. And the argument that we bought into at the time was if we let them into these institutions, they will democratize, they will become more benign, they will become a normal actor on the world stage. They proved us wrong.
Well, Michael Pillsbury in his book, 100-Year Marathon, admits, Henry Kissinger is talking about the same thing now. Hank Paulson says things in his new book that we got it wrong, that we believed Deng Xiaoping. I lived over there, and I can tell you we got it wrong. And we now know from the Made in China 2025 what their initiatives are to achieve. And my experience with the Chinese culture is that they never tell you, and this goes back to the Warring States period you mentioned earlier with Confucius and Sun Tzu, that they never tell you what they're going to do unless they've made a decision that you don't have the wherewithal or the will to stop them. Do you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
So the next thing, it seems to me you have to have a close relationship with our Secretary of State. It sounds like you have a long background with this individual who's in there now, right?
We have a common background.
And the third thing is I think we have to have a commitment that over the long term that we're not turning into a militaristic country. President Eisenhower had that opportunity. He set the stage for the next several hundred years, I believe, by paying down the debt of World War II and keeping us from becoming a military state. Can you tell the rest of the world that that's not where we're headed with you as Secretary of Defense, and that the diplomacy answer you gave earlier, would you double down on that? And given your private sector background, explain how that depth gives you the ability to transcend both worlds.
I agree, Senator. I was going to say the greatest power we have is the power of our values and our culture. People around the world aspire to come to this country for those two things alone. That's why they line up in embassies and consulates in 180 other countries around the world to come to this country, because they know we believe in freedom and democracy and individual rights, and all that will be protected. And that's the power that we have to leverage, is the power of our values and our way of life and our government.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.